Sarah was born 2 weeks premature. An emergency C-section, 3 sleepless nights at the hospital after a tangled umbilical cord threatened her and her mother Rachel's welfare. She was a healthy baby, and after a few days by my wife's side, the new doctor handed me Sarah in the hall and instructed me to take her home while they treated Rachel. Rachel had suffered from some complications from the ordeal and needed to stay at least a week to recover while being monitored. I missed her at my side and am new to the whole parenting thing, so I called out of work this week to take care of my baby. Sarah slept in the car seat on the way home with me, and I finally felt we were all going to be okay until I first saw something was odd. As we neared our driveway, I heard the gargled grunting Sarah was making and looked over to see her arms and legs miming a running or climbing action, which I'd never seen a baby do before. It might have been cute, but her bulging eyes and sneering tiny mouth looked twisted and strange. Unease stirred in me as I told her, "Almost home, sweetie," and reached over a gentle palm to brush her forehead, and her growl intensified as she strained her neck back, pushing her softball-sized head firmly back against the car seat as if to get away. I withdrew my hand and I parked, carrying her indoors as she writhed violently. She seemed very agitated, but that was just the beginning. I carried Sarah inside, a bit overwhelmed trying to care for a newborn on my own. She was so small yet so heavy, so expressive with the miserable faces she'd make. She had an intense stare that was so perpetually shocking and filled with disgust. It was creepy, and the more I tried to console her, the more she looked like she was furious. I placed her in her crib and went online, letting her rest as I researched what I could do. Message boards explained they are unable to communicate at this age. People said they often scream endlessly, but she wasn't screaming. She only seemed to be brooding, growling, and making those awful faces. I eventually nodded off, exhausted, and when I came to, I nearly had a heart attack. I lay on the couch, my slivers of closed eyes opening to reveal a bald silhouette hovering over me, jarred me with shock. My wide, fearful eyes at first had no understanding of what I was seeing until that gurgling groan, bassy for the infant, began to build and raise in pitch, higher and higher until it reached a horrible, blood-curdling scream directly into my face. Sarah's tiny body fell forwards, falling with her tiny arms plunging deep into my gasping, open mouth, stabbing into my throat. I immediately gagged, pain flashing from her weight against my tonsils and uvula, and I pushed her away to remove the tiny, intrusive arms. Shock was plastered on my face, and in the cold shadows of the night, I could see Sarah was smiling. Not a happy baby smile. This was a menacing smile, full of hatred and impending suffering. Only far more nightmarish, with that toothless grin that seemed far too wide, as her skin stretched like wrinkled latex. I looked over at the crib, completely unable to understand how she'd even gotten out. I picked her flailing, kicking body up, checking the dry diaper as she grumbled, and placed her back inside the crib with a bottle of warmed formula. I fetched the square of plexiglass I'd purchased for my photocopier Halloween costume and placed it on top, weighing it down with old college books that weighed nearly their cost. Confident this should hold through the night, I curled back on the couch to get the sleep I so desperately needed, when I was startled awake again. However, only half an hour had passed. Sarah was making a vibratory groan, seemingly too bassy for her small frame. She was standing on the kitchen countertop, visible as only a silver-lined shadow, backlit by the cold moon from the window. The glint of a knife blade shone in her miniature hand, and I jumped up to race over to her. I flicked the light on and watched in confusion as her facial features seemed to relax back into place from stretched and relocated positions like a terribly contorted rubber mold had been released. An eye had eased back from the top of her head, one from her ear, the mouth, a quivering set of drooling lips that flexed as a hole over the muscle and bone of her chin on its return to below the nose. Her dangling arm without the knife twirled slowly like a cord relaxing in more than 3 revolutions. The other gripped the knife handle with white knuckles. I glanced over to the crib, to the snapped plexiglass, and blinked, unbelieving. I approached, looking into Sarah's wide eyes and snarling lips as she breathed heavy from flaring nostrils. I was on the verge of cracking, reaching up slowly, trying to coax the knife from her, aware of silver cut into the air, forming a red line on my middle finger below the nail. Drops formed from the cut, so I grabbed an oven mitt and placed it on, reaching slowly again, and Sarah plunged it into the mitt before I could even react, and I watched a red stain swell on it with the accompanying pain. I'm a problem solver by nature, and as I swatted a handled wooden cutting board at her, the knife stuck in, jutting through cleanly, and I yanked the blade and the board away from her. The hatred on her face was beyond any I'd seen, but I tossed a towel over her and slung her over my shoulder, carrying her back to her crib. Sleep deprivation is really taking its toll on me at this point, but sleeping is clearly not an option. I've had 8 cups of coffee in the past 12 hours. I watched as black liquid spilled from the crib, trickling in a waterfall oozing from the bars, then growing on the floor like a puddle of oil. But I'm not going to clean it up now. When the sun had finally risen, I called Rachel for help, but that just confused things further. She kept telling me to go to sleep and that Rachel was fine, but she clearly doesn't know how hard it's been. Rachel wasn't making any sense, saying Sarah's sleeping like a newborn, but I can see her standing in her crib, twitching and making her face wrong as she stares at me from behind the bars.